As the NBA season has continued on and we've watched games unfold, we've seen a few heated moments between players on the court and even a few between guys that you wouldn't even imagine had that capacity to have such heated encounters. Chief among them was Wemby getting into it during the early days of the season with well-known agitator Dillon Brooks over a loose ball, leading Dillon to do as he does, which is too much. And while this is of course to be expected from Dillon Brooks, it hit a little different for me, because he was of course the representative of the modern era of crash-outs in the NBA in my last video. And as I watched as Dillon Brooks continued to embrace the power of hatred and aggression for the sake of aggression, I realized I had a job to do. Because even though my offer to a part 2 of this video was resoundingly rejected, I realized the world deserves to know about these crash-outs. And in this edition, we got everybody wilding out, from players to coaches. We even have a fan crash out. And you all deserve somebody willing to do the knowledge for you, so I'll oblige. So allow us to take yet another journey into the wide world of NBA crash outs. Crash out number 1 is a recent one, and that would of course be none other than Sam Mitchell. This man is precisely the reason I'm making this video, because his recent outburst on TV just goes to show that crashing out is not an activity limited to certain age ranges or professions. Because just like Draymond Green can have a random episode where he flips out and strangles Rudy Gobert, Mitchell showed us so too can the corporate man commentator. So seeing Sam Mitchell's crash out a few weeks ago after a severe case of pocket watching gone wrong by his co-host Chris Miles, it did a lot to help my case. But the funny thing is, thanks to a recent podcast appearance by Vince Carter in the wake of Mitchell's on-air moment, along with anecdotes from the time, we have further evidence that Mitchell has been a member of the Crash Out Nation. The story allegedly happened back in 2005, at the tail end of Vince Carter's run with Toronto, where the situation was less than peachy and the team was being coached by none other than Sam Mitchell. Now, to make things clear, Mitchell has always been a bit of a hard-nosed guy, and to be quite honest, he was known for having issues and being a bit of a crash out amongst his own players. Case in point, he allegedly had issues with Jalen Rose and famed street baller turned NBA point guard Rafer Alston, which may have stemmed from him allegedly walking into the Raptors locker room filled with world-class athletes and grown men and calling them or even going so far as to talk about the types of women that these, once again, grown men world-class athletes would bring into their hotel rooms. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that Mitchell appears to be a guy who moved in his coaching style like he not only wasn't afraid of smoke, but actively tested who was willing to go there with him. However, while his insults and tests with Alston and Rose may have gone largely unpunished, when he tested to see if the furnace was on with VC, he found out very quickly that he was not for the funnies. According to Jalen Rose, in a since updated account from Carter himself, the incident appears to have occurred just 6 games into Mitchell's first year with Toronto, right before a game against the Trailblazers. Apparently, Mitchell was engaging in his usual round of somewhat reckless trash talk to his players, which eventually devolved into some playful, heavy quotation marks, wrestling between Vince Carter and Sam Mitchell. Now this is where the story veers off into different directions, because Mitchell says that Vince accidentally dropped him onto the training table, while Vince says that he just put Mitchell down before he could put him down. But what's clear is that by all accounts, Vince body slammed Sam Mitchell onto the ground. Now this is a crash out on Mitchell for so many reasons. For starters, Mitchell was in his first month as a head coach of a star player who already very clearly wanted out of his current situation, and you decided to antagonize him, thinking he wouldn't harm you. Secondly, not only did Mitchell get body slammed, but Vince then went out and played horrible against Portland, and the Raptors would lose that game, further staining Mitchell's reputation as a coach. And third, perhaps the most confusing part, is that Mitchell, a 41-year-old retired player far past his prime, decided to wrestle the 6'6" superstar nicknamed Half Man Half Amazing and thought that he would win. An unwise decision that, up until 3 weeks ago, I would have said he learned from, but clearly not. But for our next crash out, we return to the court with a man who is so devious, so utterly violent, he earned the nickname Mad Max. For our second player, we have Vernon Maxwell. There's a lot to be said about Vernon Maxwell, and to be quite fair, in his interviews, he seems like a solid dude that you'd work with at a job or know from your block and be cool with. And of course, we here on Johnny Hoops do not support any biased reporting or judging of a book by its cover. But in this case, If you look and listen to Vernon Maxwell, you could tell that he's a bit of an unreasonable customer, we'll say. His voice is far past the point of regular raspy, entering the realm of a pack a day, and his wide eyes give off that trademark look of bald fury that we've come to associate with crash-outs like Quincy Acey in the league. I mean, the guy was nicknamed Mad Max, and it wasn't by chance, as every story you hear about him sounds more like something that came out of a prison than a league housing multi-million-dollar athletes. For example, one time Maxwell got into a fight with Hakeem Olajuwon, who was his teammate at the time, mind you, and got so mad that he, by his own admission, contemplated stabbing him. Or there's the time where he got into a fight at practice with Gary Payton, and after allegedly putting hands on that man, then decided to try and end him for good by launching a 5-pound dumbbell at his head. Maxwell is and should remain as the image that comes to your mind when you think of the term bald rage, because of all the stories you hear about him, even from his own mouth, never sound like he was much of a de-escalator. And it's even funnier because Maxwell was actually a really solid player, who, like most crash-outs in the league, was known for his hard-nosed defense while also being a decent scorer who averaged 12.8 points for his 13-year career in the league. However, it was always clear what type of timing Mad Max was on when he stepped on the court, which is why his crash out is one of the most unique we've seen on a multitude of levels. To set the stage, it all happened on February 6th, 1995, during Max's 7th year in the league on the Houston Rockets. Houston was getting absolutely thrashed by the Portland Trail Blazers, which was sure to make any player agitated, and by the third quarter, to add salt to the wound, as most any fan would, they decided to engage in some trash talk. Now allow me to introduce you to Steve George, a fan who was at this game and feeling good with his seats relatively close to the court and very close to the Rockets bench, decided he too would heckle the team. So let's play a surprise edition of Guess That Crash Out. You're Steve George, a Trailblazer fan who's having a great night and wants to kick off a bit of friendly trash talk between yourself and known madman Vernon Maxwell. What do you say? A. Boo, Max you suck. B. Mad Max, more like Sad Max. C. You can't guard Clyde Max. Or D. Make a remark about Maxwell's stillborn daughter. While I'd hope that you choose something between A or C, even though B was a horrible pun, my bad, George chose D. And I genuinely cannot think of a quicker way to catch a whooping than saying something as deplorable as this. That's right. In a surprise reversal of the crash out, Steve George allegedly made comments about Maxwell and his stillborn daughter, to which Max responded by swiftly swooping into the stands and breaking George's jaw. This is such a mind-boggling twist because while Maxwell undoubtedly did crash out beyond belief, and breaking dude's jaw is definitely wild, it's simultaneously low-key the first justifiable crash out we've seen in this series if what Maxwell says is true. So of course, Maxwell was ejected, suspended for 10 games, fined $20,000, George threatened to sue, yada yada yada. But in a wild reversal, we see our first justifiable crash out from the league's most psychotic man. However, for our final player, we turn to yet another man famed for his off-court beatdowns and other eccentricities. For our final player, we have Ron Artest. The last time I made this video, friends, family, and commenters alike all took care to remind me of a few players and people that I was missing. And without a doubt, the name that I heard most was Ron Artest, also known as Meta Sanderford Artest. And to be quite honest, my reasoning for not including Ron was simple, because his reputation, much like Draymond's, literally precedes him in terms of his, say, fondness for resorting to violence. However, unlike Draymond, who, for the most part, has built his reputation as an enforcer in the NBA while maintaining a mostly clean-cut appearance off the court, Artest was also known for his eccentricities and wild behavior outside of those four lines. Case in point, this article from Basketball Forever highlighted some of his wildest moments, like attempting to work at an electronics store while he was also in the NBA, or asking the Pacers for some time away. A request that doesn't seem too unreasonable until you realize that he wanted the time to promote his rap album. And of course, there's that one thing that happened in Detroit that everyone probably expected to put him on this list too. But regardless of what story you choose, the fact remains that Ron was a wild guy. But allow me to share a story about his nature that once again points to the value that can be seen in a crash out, as well as the way that these things can oftentimes be misconstrued based on the reputation of a certain player. It all happened back in June of 2001, when a then 21-year-old Artest was entering his second official offseason after a respectable first 2 years in the league. Despite his offensive game not yet being fully developed, he managed to average around 12 points for his first 2 years while shooting 40% from the field for the Chicago Bulls. But most of his value came from his hard-nosed defense, which was pretty much predicated on the fact that he was willing to take the defense as far as you'd like. This reputation had followed him from his youth and into the draft, where his at times misunderstood and complex personality stemming from a lifetime of trauma was in turn understood as violence for violence's sake, souring some on Ron. So it was under these circumstances that he was invited to a private pickup session with his all-time favorite player and the legend of his current NBA team, Michael Jordan, to play pickup ahead of the then 38-year-old's return to the NBA with the Wizards. And while they were playing, the game went just as pretty much every story about Michael Jordan seems to go, with Artest attempting to guard Mike while being unceremoniously scored on and punished offensively, with the refs calling foul after foul on Ron as Jordan continued to drain shot after shot. But the game was aggressive, as Artest's defense often was, and in a pure accident, Ron ended up elbowing Michael Jordan, who after hitting the game winner, would go home and discover that he had broken his ribs. And this is a nightmare situation for Ron, or any second-year player who would manage to break the ribs of one of, if not the most recognizable athletes of all time ahead of their return to the court. On its own, this is already sacrilege, blasphemy, all of the above to certain people. But to make it worse, Artest wasn't even able to adequately defend himself because of his reputation as a quote-unquote bad apple, whom people already had a certain distaste for. And so, despite the real story being that it was purely an accident by Artest, it was of course misconstrued and manipulated to the point where people said that he body slammed Mike, while others said that it was an outright fistfight. And this type of misunderstanding and narrative construction by the media really gets at the heart of the reason behind the disconnect and sometimes outright distrust between players and the media. Because this was a story that followed Artest around for years, adding to his legend of being a crash out and reckless player. But unfortunately, accidental or otherwise, a crash out is a crash out. And breaking Michael Jordan's ribs will undoubtedly put you on a list like this. However, the reason I chose this story is because of its positive ending, similar to that of Oakley's in part 1. Because despite him, once again, literally breaking Jordan's ribs, Mike not only called Artest to tell him that it was alright, but also invited him back to play, saying that he gave him good work on defense. And this wouldn't even be the last time that Artest's skill and will to get violent got him an opportunity, as we all know the tale of Kobe Bryant's respect for Ron's will to take it there ended up with him on the Lakers winning a ring with Kobe, who trusted him all the way. In this way, Artest's story is yet another lesson in the value of that aggression and the necessity of a guy who's willing to take it to that next level, because that's the type of guy you'd want to back you up when it's winning time. So I guess the real moral of the story here is that it's okay to break a 38-year-old man's ribs, because every crew needs a crash out sometimes. But with the Ron Artest segment over, we've reached the end of the video. This was just yet another chance to talk about some of the NBA's crash outs and some more wild scenarios we've seen in the history of the league, and there's infinitely more crash out moments that have yet to be explored. So rather than me asking if you guys want another video, I'll just say I'll see you guys at another point with another vid. And hopefully you enjoyed this one. Hopefully I see you in the next one.